Hello, this is Christopher Scott from ChristopherScottBlog.com. Today is another Bible lesson that we're going to be looking at the topic of harmony and joy among believers from Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. So let's go ahead and get started with the text today. We're talking about harmony and joy among believers. And if you've been watching past videos, we've been taking the book of Philippians section by section, taking anywhere from 4 to 8 verses a day, and just walking through the text, reading it verse by verse, looking at some of the practical things that Paul is writing in his context, and then also trying to make some applications for everyday believers, as well as some specific leadership moments along the ways that are relevant for leaders. So as we get in today, I want to start out by reading the text. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. As you can see here, it's backwards because it's videoed, but the New Living Translation is what I usually read from, and I alternate between the New Living and then my own translation that I actually create when I go through and translate the Greek text. So if there are specific differences between the two, I'll let you know, but when we read or in these videos, I'm always at least in one of the two. So let me go ahead and start by reading God's Word. Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Therefore, my beloved brothers and sisters, you are my joy and pride, so stand in the Lord. I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to think the same thing in the Lord. Yes, I ask you, my true comrade, support them, those who helped me in the gospel, and they also helped Clement and my many other helpers. Their names are written in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord at all times. Again, I say, rejoice. Let everyone see your kindness. The Lord is near. So that's the text of Philippians 4, 1 through 5, and we're talking about harmony and joy among believers. And a little joke I like to talk about when I think about harmony and joy among believers is a guy that went to the judgment. He had just died and went to the judgment, and the theology of the joke isn't very good. It's a joke. They're usually not good, but because there is no judgment for believers, we're already made right by our faith in Jesus Christ. But this is a joke, so let me just tell it and read it. So the man that went to the judgment, and he gets to the judgment, and St. Peter's there at the gates, and he says, Sir, I've seen your life, and you really haven't done anything super good, but you never really done anything super bad. So I'm not really sure what to do with you. Do you have a story or anything you can tell me that would help me decide either way, whether to let you in heaven or whether to not? And so the guy says, yes, I do have a story, actually. There was this time I was driving down the road, and I saw these thugs beating up on a skinny little guy on the side of the road. So I pulled over, and I walked up to one of the thugs, and I said, you had better be nice to this man. And then I reached up to the thug, and he had one of those lip rings in his lip. So I reached up there, I grabbed the lip ring out of his lip, and I ripped it out. And I stood up for that man that was being beat up on the side of the road by the thugs. And St. Peter at the gates goes, oh my gosh, wow, when did this happen? And the man responds to St. Peter, about 3 minutes ago. So, which was why he ended up at heaven, in case you didn't get that. So again, not the best theology, but has a little bit to do with harmony and joy among people, and what to do in conflict and things like that. So, just a fun little joke I like to throw in there about these topics. And if I can relate it to the topic, sometimes they're related, sometimes they're not. But anyways. So let's walk through the text, starting with Philippians 4:1, looking at harmony and joy among believers. Paul starts out this section here saying, therefore. And therefore, this is an inferential conjunction which could be translated, and so. He's used this in a way to draw the conclusion from the previous 5 verses, from 3:17 to 21, and 3:18 and 19 he talks about those people who are headed for destruction, whose appetite is in their belly, that are headed for destruction. And then in 20 and 21, Paul talks about the true believers and true citizens of heaven. And so he continues on that thought and says, therefore, or and so, and he's starting to draw a conclusion from these discussions about those who are headed for destruction. So he says, dear brothers and sisters, stay true to the Lord. I love you and long to see you, dear friends, for you are my joy and the crown I receive for my work. And when he says you are my joy and crown, the New Living Translation says joy and crown. My translation I use, you are my joy and prize. this continues the idea that Paul's starting to conclude his letter and bring it to a close. So throughout this letter, we've seen Paul's ministry and his desire for the Philippians to live righteous lives. That's why he's been writing to them. Paul writes that the Philippians are his joy and his pride, or his joy and his crown. So what's the joy and pride, or the joy and crown in this area? So the word here used for crown is the Greek word stephanos, and it gets used in 3 different ways in the New Testament. It's used as a wreath that got put on someone's head, as in Jesus when he went to his crucifixion. So in that use, it's a literal physical item that's used for someone and put on someone. The second use is what is used here, which is not literal, but it is figurative and describes an inward feeling of a person. And this is Paul's inward feeling that he has as a person who has done work to the Philippian believers and supported them in the past. And then the third meaning is an actual physical award or prize for exceptional service. It's not necessarily a crown, it's not a feeling in heart, but it's, it's like when you win a race, you get something, a medal, whatever it might have been then. So those are the 3 uses of the Greek word stephanos. And the one used here is Paul's personal feeling of accomplishment for having worked in the Philippian believers, if that makes sense. So the important point to note here is this isn't a special reward Paul gets to heaven. He's not the super Christian who gets a special relationship with God, or a special crown when he gets to God, or a special honor, or a special room in heaven because he's special. This is just a way that Paul's saying the Philippian believers and his ministry to them provides him a joy and a sense of accomplishment in his own life. And then he also says here, stand in the Lord, which kind of continues on some of the military and athletic imagery that we've talked about in past lessons, if you've seen my past videos on the book of Philippians. So this idea of stand in the Lord could be translated 3 different ways when we look at it. One way to translate it would be progressive, which would say, so at this present time, stand in the Lord, with the meaning that we're standing now and we're going to progress into the future. Another way to translate this would be a customary, which just is kind of how the New Living Translation states it and how I state it. Stand in the Lord. Stand now, stand later, stand forever, stand in the Lord, a customary use. And then another way to translate this would be iterative, which would be so continuously stand in the Lord as a repeated idea that happens over time, or so repeatedly stand in the Lord in an iterative use. Either way, these things, whether you translate this in either of those 3 ways, it's emphasizing something that we do now and that we do in the future and continue to do in our lives. And it kind of echoes Paul's statement earlier in the book of Philippians, in Philippians 1:27, where he writes, above all, you must live as citizens of heaven, conducting yourselves in a manner worthy of the good news about Jesus Christ. Philippians 1:27. And if you've watched my previous videos, we really set that up kind of as the direct, most clear verse in the letter. And so Paul says, live as citizens of heaven, stand in the Lord, live as citizens of heaven. And then he gives examples of that in Philippians 1:28 through 30, 2:1 through 4, 2:5 through 11, and then 2:12 through 18 are 4 examples of how you stand in the Lord and live righteously and live as a citizen of heaven. So this word kind of goes back to Philippians 1:27 and kind of echoes Paul's original statement back then, and he's starting to come back to it here. So that's Philippians 4:1, where Paul wrote, therefore, my dear brothers and sisters, stay true to the Lord. I love you and long to see you, dear friends, for you are my joy and the crown I receive for my work. And then he continues on, Philippians 4:2, Paul writes, I now appeal to Euodia and Syntyche. Please, because you belong to the Lord, settle your disagreement. So here it's important to note that 2 women are brought up here, Euodia and Syntyche. And there appears to be some level of disagreement that these 2 women had in the church. And Paul writes about them in his letter to the Philippians, saying that they need to settle their disagreement. And it's important to note that in the Greek New Testament, Each woman's name in this text is placed first for emphasis. So in Greek, word order doesn't matter as much as it does in English. In English, we usually have subject, verb, object. Christopher went to the store, right? So Christopher is a subject, went is the verb, the store is the direct object. Greek uses case endings and case tenses to show subject, direct object, verbs, things like that. So it doesn't really matter. And as a result, you can put words in different orders to show emphasis. So here, both of these women's names are put first for emphasis. So it's kind of like in our culture where you might yell someone's name to grab their attention. Christopher, will you pass me the salt shaker? Something like that. And Paul appears to be doing something similar to that here, where he says, Euodia, I urge you, and Syntyche, I urge you. So he calls, each woman's name first, then he says the verb, and then he does it again for each woman. It's the exact same address to each woman. So both women's actions are condemned here, regardless of who is at fault. We don't really know who is at fault. Then he says to them, I urge Euodia and I urge Syntyche to think the same thing in the Lord. This idea of to think the same thing, and his appeal to these two women to have the same mental attitude and to have the same basic aim, direction, and orientation in their behavior. That they would agree on whatever it is that they're disagreeing. And one possibility, why should they want to disagree? Well, one possibility is because they have a common bond in the Lord and a common ministry in the church, so they need to agree. Alternatively, might need to agree in submission to the Lord and to the Lord's authority. So someone might say, Paul's written this letter to the Philippians. He's written 3 chapters. He's talked positively about Timothy. In chapter 2, he's talked positively about Epaphroditus in chapter 2. Now when he talks about women, he condemns them as settling disagreements. So what does that mean in the church? Does that mean that women are always causing issues? Does that mean they're troublemakers? Does that mean they shouldn't be allowed to have influence? What does that mean? So someone who doesn't read their Bibles and might not know the Bible well might make some of those conclusions, that women are always troublemakers, they're always stirring up trouble, they're always causing issues. However, if you read your Bible closely and pay attention not just to what's here, but in the entire New Testament, especially the book of Acts, you will notice that in Acts 16:11 through 15, the church started in Philippi was started by women. Okay, it was started specifically with Lydia in chapter 16, verses 11 through 15, and then directly after that, Paul saves a girl who was demon-possessed, and he saves her out of that, and this girl becomes a Christian, and that's the reason Paul and Silas are put in prison. And in the text several times it says that Paul went to Lydia's house, stayed there, she invited people to her house, and that Paul did ministry there. So it's not that women are special troublemakers or anything like that, but specifically here in this context, the women were the first ones to receive the gospel, hear the gospel, and respond. In Acts it even says that on Sunday, Paul and Silas went out to the field to find people praying, and that's where he found women. So all the women are out there praying and being spiritual. Men are at home watching football or doing whatever. And that's who the gospel first gets shared with, is these women. So it's not that women are especially troublemakers or anything like that, but that is who the gospel was first shared with, and likely the gospel started with them and spread through their ministry, which is why women are addressed here. So as we continue on, that was Philippians 4:2, and we go on to Philippians 4:3. Where Paul writes, "And I ask you, my true partner, to help these 2 women, for they worked hard with me in telling others the good news. They worked hard along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are written in the book of life." So this is a great verse. I love this verse. It's a little long, a little complex, so we'll take it clause by clause and just work through it as we always do in these videos. So Philippians 4:3, Paul says, "I ask you, my true comrade." My translation, I say comrade. The NLT says true partner. The first observation we need to make here is that Euodia and Syntyche have a disagreement, and Paul addresses another person, a true partner or a comrade, to come in and help these women. Okay? So the first observation in conflict, when there's things going on, that it's okay to ask for help from other people. It's okay to have a third person as a mediator come in between two people or two different groups of people to help them settle their disagreement. Additionally, in this clause, I ask you, my true partner or true comrade, who is this person? Is often a good question to ask, and various answers have been provided. One, some people say this is a woman and this is Paul's wife. Of all conclusions they could make, that's what some people say. However, Paul says clearly in 1 Corinthians 7 verse 8 that he doesn't have a wife. Second, I like John Calvin's comments about the possibility that Paul has a wife, where Calvin basically says Paul went to Philippi, he only entered the city twice, never returned, yet he would have a wife there of all places. Nothing is more unlikely that he would have had a wife there, is pretty much Calvin's comments. If you read his epistle to Paul, if you read Calvin's commentary on the epistle of Paul and the apostle to Philippians, page 114 is where he has some comments about how unlikely that this would be Paul's wife. Another suggestion about who this is the woman Lydia, which was actually mentioned in Acts 16 that we just talked about. She was the first one to receive the gospel and welcome Paul into her home and invited people into her home to share the gospel. So this might be Lydia, is a possibility. However, the word used here, sunaiges, is a masculine noun, which means it's unlikely it would be referring to Lydia, possibly, but unlikely. A third suggestion is that this is a proper name, that is someone's name, Synaigas. I think Synaigas is the transliteration. I don't have my Greek New Testament here with me, but I have the text. How would you appropriately say it? Synaigi or Synaigas, just depends on how you pronounce some of those letters. So that could be. However, no person by the name of Synaigas has ever been found in Greek literature. So this would have been someone whose name is used once in this letter to the Philippians, but not used anywhere else. So there's no other historical records of someone having that name throughout Greek times. So unlikely. A fourth suggestion is that this might be Epaphroditus, who is actually the man who is carrying this letter of Philippians to the people in Philippi. So that is a possibility that it might be Epaphroditus, and the fact that this is a masculine noun might suggest that. But again, we don't know. There's a lot of things in the Bible that are definitively clear and make sense and we can support and validate. There's other things like this that we kind of just get to guess and propose ideas and try to share our best guess, but we really don't know, and this is one of them. So let's continue on. Paul says in Philippians 4:3, and I ask you, my true partner, which we just talked about, to help these two women, Euodia and Syntyche, for they worked hard with me in telling others the good news. They worked along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are written in the book of life. Okay, so let's kind of take this through here. So Paul writes to this person, to the Philippians, and then addresses the person that's going to help these two women and says, support them, those who helped me in the gospel. And this Greek word used here is sulambano, is used twice in the New Testament to describe how these women helped Paul in sharing the gospel. Okay, the other time it's used is in Luke 5:7, where there's two men fishing in a boat. Jesus says, cast your net on the other side. Then they do that, and they get so much fish that the men in the boat call out to guys in another boat and say, come over here to help us. The verb there, for help or to help, is the same one used here when it says support them, support Euodia and Syntyche, for they helped me in the gospel, is what it's saying. was Paul saying. Okay, so these women appeared to provide some help to Paul in sharing the gospel, as well as helping Clement to share the gospel, and as well as helping some of Paul's other co-workers to share the gospel. So it's good to look at this and ask, what can we conclude from this text about women and ministry, and what can we not conclude about women and ministry from this text? So what we can conclude is that these women did play an active role in helping Paul to share the gospel and share the good news. They actively worked, they actively helped, they actively did ministry, is what we can conclude. What we can't conclude or can't say is that these women had a big preaching and teaching ministry, or that they were up in front communicating the gospel to thousands of people. We can't say that. The text doesn't say that. Nor does it say that these women were simply Paul's servants that cooked his meals, carried his books, wrote down his notes, served as a secretary, right? So what we can conclude is that these women did do ministry. What we can't conclude is they were just simply little servants off to the side that didn't have a significant role in the ministry and sharing the gospel among people in Philippi. And I think this is important because this verse does touch on, obviously, women's role in ministry in the church and what that looks like. And so we can't conclude a lot from this text, and you need to look at other verses throughout the Bible if you're going to make those kinds of conclusions. And the topic of women in ministry has always been a tough topic within the church and to deal with and struggle with. And in my library, I have a series of books from Zondervan called the Zondervan Counterpoint series. And in these series, they will provide a topic, and then they'll select several authors to contribute a chapter about the topic. And each author will take a different view, and they'll each kind of take a different position and talk through it. So, for example, one of the books that I have is called Genesis, History, Fiction, or Neither. And then each author takes a position and writes about it, and they kind of interact, and they each show their different views. So out of the 26 books I have in my library for that Zondervan Counterpoints series, I have one titled Two Views on Women in Ministry. And out of the 26 books, that's the biggest one, surprisingly. It's like 450 pages. It's huge, and it's only 2 views. So again, that's just to emphasize that this is a big topic. Women in ministry and the roles in the church and what that's supposed to look like is difficult. And this text definitely doesn't suggest what women really did or didn't do, but it does show that they had a role and that they served and that they're allowed to do things within the church. What women are allowed to do within the church, Philippians 4:3 doesn't say. But as we look at that topic and women in the church, usually people will land in 2 different camps. One will be egalitarian, the other one is complementarian. So for egalitarian, it says that men and women are equal in value and equal in roles in the church. So men and women are equal in value to God, and they can have the same roles in the church. Whatever a man can do, a woman can do within the church, right? And then complementarian is the view that says man and woman are equal in value, but have different roles in the church. So man and woman are both equal in value to God, but within the context of church, they have different roles and have different ministries. So you'll see those terms used, egalitarian and complementarian, if you ever see those. And again, I tell you the terms, so if you hear people throw them out, you know, and you can have conversations with them. So as we continue on, we talked about egalitarian, complementarian. The last little clause of Philippians 4:3 talks about the book of life. Writing, Paul says, help these women whose names are written in the book of life. So this book of life is interesting. It is something that's discussed in the entire Bible pretty much. In the New Testament, we see this phrase, book of life, literally biblos zoe, book, life, communicated throughout the New Testament in those exact terms, book of life. From Philippians, and then at least 7 or 8 times in the book of Revelation. But this book of life is communicated all the way back in Exodus 32, verses 32 through 33, where the Israelites are disobedient and build a calf, have Aaron make them a calf while Moses is up on the mountain they're down on the bottom waiting for him, and he takes forever, according to them, and they have Moses make them a calf. And that's when Moses says, I pray that you will not erase their names from the book. And this book that gets started or first mentioned in Exodus 32, verses 32 through 33, is communicated again in Daniel 12:1, Isaiah 4:3, Psalm 69, 69:28. This book of life is communicated again and discussed as God's written account of those who will receive salvation and inherit salvation, pretty much. So that's another topic that we don't really have time to go through. But I like Calvin's comments on this book of life, where Calvin writes, the book of life is the roll of the righteous who are predestined to life, as in the writings of Moses. And he cites Exodus 32:32. Calvin continues, God has this roll beside himself in safekeeping. Hence the book is nothing else than his eternal counsel fixed in his own breast. In place of this term, Ezekiel employs the expression, the writing of the house of Israel. With the same view, it is said in Psalm 69:29, saying, let them be blotted out of the book of the living, and let them not be written among the righteous. That is, let them be numbered among the elect of God, whom he receives within the limits of his church and kingdom. So that's the book of life mentioned here. And the most references to the book of life is actually in the book of Revelation that I'm developing some material on right now. So I'm sure I'll get to teach on that later if you continue watching these videos. So that's Philippians verse 4:3. Let's continue on. We got 2 more verses today that we'll look at. Paul writes in Philippians 4:4, always be full of joy in the Lord. I say it again, rejoice. And I love reading Paul, and I love reading the Bible, because sometimes Paul has these sentences that will go on for 5 or 6 or 11 verses sometimes, and it's all one sentence, right, with a main verb and then dependent clause, dependent clause, dependent clause, dependent clause. And then other times he writes where he just says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. So it's always interesting, and I like it. So here Paul refers to considering, he writes about just being considerate of each other and rejoicing in the Lord and showing each other love. And so we're supposed to be full of joy. The person we're supposed to be full of joy in is in the Lord, and we're supposed to always be full of joy in the Lord. So that's for Philippians 4:4. Let's continue on to Philippians 4:5. This is our last verse for today that we'll look at. Paul writes, let everyone see that you are considerate in all you do. Remember, the Lord is coming soon. So here, where Paul says, let everyone see your kindness, these are the activities and tasks that people do which can be seen by others. However, it's important to note that the voice of the phrase, let everyone see, right? Now when we talk about voice, in English, when we grow up speaking English, if that's your first language that you grew up speaking, it's easy to learn to speak the language but not really know the background of it or how it actually works. So in English, we usually have 3 voices. Okay, we'll have active voice, which is Christopher. Let's say I hit the ball. I hit the ball is active voice. Passive is I was hit by the ball. Sorry. So active voice, I hit the ball. I did an action that occurred on something else. Passive voice is the ball was hit. I was hit by the ball. Okay, I'm just standing there. The ball comes, whacks me, and hits me. So in the English here, it appears to be a passive voice where Paul says, let everyone see that you are considerate. However, Paul uses an imperative here, which is something that's supposed to be done. It's a command that we're supposed to do something. So even though it's a passive idea in the English, it's still something we're supposed to actively do things and do actions that when seen by others, they will see that we are kind to them. So let everyone see that you're considerate in all you do. And I think the idea that Paul has here is that there's going to be some things that no one ever sees us do, right? When I wake up in the morning at 5, I have a little quiet time where I journal, I read my Bible, and I pray. No one ever sees that. However, for the other 12 hours of the day that I'm out and about working, going to the grocery store, doing whatever, there are people that see what I do. And Paul, I think, is addressing the fact that most of what we do, other people see. And because of that, we must ensure that what they see is that we are considerate, if that makes sense. So this isn't a passive idea that, oh, well, if you want to, let them see you're considerate. If you don't, that's okay. No, it's something that we have to do. It's not something that we're doing in order to prove our salvation or to earn our way to heaven, because as we've already studied in this book, because of our belief and faith in Jesus Christ, we are currently citizens of heaven, and that's assured. So it's not something we're trying to do to prove salvation or keep it, but it's just something that we're supposed to do as a response to where we are in our life as Christians. So Paul writes, "Let everyone see your kindness," and then continues on, "The Lord is near." In my translation, I say, "The Lord is near," and then in the New Living Translation, it says, "Remember, the Lord is coming soon." And this verse connects with James 5:8-9, where James writes, "You too must be patient. Take courage, for the coming of the Lord is near. Don't grumble about each other, brothers and sisters, or you will be judged, for look, the judge is standing at the door." So here James says that since the Lord is near, we should not judge each other. And there's two options for this verse that we could translate for this clause, is that the Lord is near. Could be in a spatial idea that the Lord is near me and watching me, so we need to be considerate and show love for one another in all we do. Or there's an idea of a temporal idea that the Lord is going to be coming back soon and returning soon. Therefore, we need to be considerate to each other. And the New Living Translation takes the idea of spatial, of temporal, that the Lord is coming soon. I think most translations would refer to that. And as you read the book of Revelation, when it talks about the Lord is near, it uses this same word, gunes, to talk about the Lord coming near. I'm sorry, engus is the near word for Greek that's in Revelation. So this has been a study throughout the text of Philippians 4:1-5, where Paul talks about harmony and joy among the believers and how that's something that we're supposed to do and have. Paul has an example here of Euodia and Syntyche and sends a third person to come in and help them work through their issues. And then Paul continues to say, be full of joy, be considerate in all you do, for the Lord is coming soon. And sadly, when I read about harmony and among believers and joy, some of the past Southern Baptist disagreements that have been going on come to mind. So I did a little research about and I currently attend a Southern Baptist church here, so I'm picking on my own people and myself, if that makes sense. I'm not picking on anybody else. So how to create and keep harmony and joy among believers. Here's 3 phrases I found in a quick Google search about the Baptists and their lack of joy and harmony in the past. Again, I'm just taking this right from the internet. I'm not changing anything. So in 1980, Judge Pressler publicly announced the strategy of the fundamentalist takeover. Fundamentalist takeover in a church? Probably not harmony and joy. Here's another one. In 1985, the Southern Baptist Convention formed a peace committee to investigate the growing conflict and make recommendations for conflict resolution. Yet, it was dominated by fundamentalists, and the committee failed to approach reconciliation. So the poor peace committee couldn't even approach reconciliation within some of the issues that were going on in the Southern Baptist Convention. And then, as a result of all of this, one website talked about 2001 and the registrations for the Central Baptist Fellowship or whatever convention was 5,100, and then there was another one, the Baptist Central Convention of Texas, and it's just a mess, sadly, that things have gone on where there's not joy, there's not harmony among those groups. And again, I'm picking on my own people, my own church that I go to, that's just what happens sometimes. But I think Paul gives us some good example about what to do here, that we need to focus on each other, to settle our disagreements because we belong to the Lord, and that we need to find a third person to help us. So on Todd Benkert's blog, he provides 18 helpful things to do when there's disagreements. Okay, so I want to read some of these to you. Really good practical suggestions from Todd Benkert on the blog. It's called sbcvoices.com. So sbcvoices.com is where I pulled these from. So Todd talks about 18 things to avoid in Baptist disagreements. Number 1, a willful ignorance in which we choose to embrace a caricature of someone's view rather than truly understand it. Number 2, an unwillingness to allow persons to speak their own words. 3, rejection of a view as out of hand without having considered the merits of the argument. Number 4, an unwillingness to engage in real discussion. Number 5, taking offense or rejecting an argument because of its perceived practical implication. So these are things not to do in the Southern Baptist disagreements. Number 6, ascribing a perceived logical outcome of an opponent's view. Number 7, a willful blindness to our own presuppositions. Number 8, parsing words to the point of ascribing hidden agendas. Number 9, failure to give one's opponent the benefit of the doubt. Number 10, a blindness to our own motives and personal agenda. This is a good list. I like it. He's going right for it. Number 11, attacking the character of a person rather than the argument made. Number 12, responses that are reactionary, not thoughtful. 13, again, more things we're supposed to avoid in disagreements. Responding to critics with a divisive posture. Number 14, name-calling or lumping a person into a particular group. 15, a dogmatic approach to issues which are tertiary in nature. 16, a failure to do theological triage. 17, a failure to have an Aaronic spirit and treat our opponents with respect. And number 18, probably most important, a lack of humility. So this has been a study of joy and harmony among Christian believers based on the Philippian chapter, based on the text of Philippians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. My name is Christopher Scott from ChristopherScottBlog.com. Thanks for tuning in today. And next post and next video that we'll look at will be on Philippians 4, 6 through 9, and talk about worry, anxiety, prayer, and thanksgiving, and most of all, the peace of God. So again, thanks for tuning in. I hope to talk to you again soon.